Hey guys, welcome to 3 and Out. You can check out the podcast below in the description. And here's what I need you to do. Make sure you subscribe to the Volumes YouTube channel to stay up to date to everything we're doing here on 3 and Out and the Volume. So let's start with Deebo, who, it's gotten a little weird this offseason, the contract, how much would they pay a guy that's had, 10 weeks of elite production. Been watching football, I'm 37 years old, since I can remember, for almost 30 years. That's as good of a stretch of football from a non-quarterback at any position you'll ever see. I've seen every snap of Deebo's career, but I was live at that Rams game. That was as dominant of a game as you'll ever see. Becoming a running back, throwing for a touchdown, catching enormous passes. Deebo Samuel is what I call an absolute war daddy. And there's a small percentage of athletes, even in the pro sports and baseball, basketball, and definitely football, who take their game up when the games matter most, and you feel more confident going into battle with them in a playoff game than you even do a regular season game, and he fits in that category. I see it with the Warriors with Draymond, Steph, and Clay. Like, you want to go to war with those guys. Deebo's one of those guys. But the amount of money guys are getting paid, his position is kind of unique because he doesn't truly have one. He can play wide receiver. He's a dominant running back. He's a dominant football player, which ultimately, like anytime that any business you run, if you hire someone who's just great at doing everything, that's a good thing. Like, that's what you want. It just makes it complicated in the sport of football because wide receivers now make more than any other position not named quarterback. Wide receivers, on average, right now are the second highest paid position. Because, and part of it is the recent group of guys that just got paid. These guys are making $25, $26, $27 million, and running backs clearly don't make anything near that. And we've seen this forever with the tight ends and the wide receivers. Like, how is it fair that George Kittle, Darren Waller, and Travis Kelce make so much less than these wide receivers? Name me any other job, and we're talking about so much money here, even if I put it into relative terms. If you get paid $100,000 to do one thing, or you get paid $400,000 to do the other thing, and you already do both things, you're obviously going to want the $400,000 instead of the $100,000, right? So that's no different than, $12 million is a lot, but I'd rather have 21, especially when you're throwing me the ball. It's kind of bullshit. I've always thought tight ends get screwed, and I even think running backs get screwed. This is a complicated situation. I don't have any inside information on it. I'm just watching from afar like the rest of us. But here's what I know. I'm born and raised in Northern California. And I'm someone who no longer, when I moved back here from Philadelphia, I desperately wanted to come back to California. It meant a lot to me. Like, I want to go back to California. That's where I'm going to live. I don't think like that a decade later. It's probably a little less than that. But this place has gotten really weird. And part of it is financially, it wasn't even necessarily, I wasn't making any money then, so it didn't even matter. Like, you pay a lot of taxes. You pay a lot to live here. I get it's part of the deal. But when you truly start making, and I'm not making Deebo Samuel money, you start looking at your taxes, you go, this is kind of crazy. Especially when you know people in Vegas or these other states, Texas, Florida, they don't pay any income tax. So once you get to the top bracket, which Deebo is about to enter, and technically he would enter it this year, you start paying 13% of your income. So let's just look at the positives and negatives. If I'm Deebo Samuel, once you live here, he's from the South. 2 years ago, the 49ers in Santa Clara County, they got kicked out of Santa Clara County. They literally had to move their operation to Arizona. This is a guy that's from the SEC who spends his offseason in Florida and South Carolina, and his team got kicked out of the state of California. But it was really the county in which his team plays and has to live. If I was him, I'd be like, what the fuck is going on? And then you go, he's represented by the same agent as A.J. Brown. Let's say they got the exact same contract, A.J. Brown and Deebo Samuel. And let's just pick a number, $60 million. That's the true guaranteed amount of money. Who knows what the actual, 5 years, $110 million, whatever. But they get $60 million guaranteed. A.J. Brown plays in Tennessee. His team is based in Nashville. There are no state income taxes. Deebo Samuel plays and lives in the most expensive area in America and the highest tax rates. I did the math. Now, it changes because you get taxed where you play, but obviously Deebo would play 8 or 9 of his home games. He plays the Rams every year here. His taxes, I think, again, a little loosey-goosey here, but between $6 and $7 million per year of take-home cash over the life of the contract of that $60 million, A.J. Brown would have extra in his account than Deebo. Like, if you or me were about to get $50-60 million and we lived in California and we were able to, well, could I get that same amount of money and live in Vegas or live in Texas or live in Florida? You would immediately move because you could use that extra money, I don't know, the $6-7 million you would save, and buy a fucking house in L.A., San Diego, the coast, wherever you wanted. So it's just basic economics. And he has disputed Adam Schefter that he doesn't want to live here, but he wouldn't be a human if he's not thinking like this. And the money is so great now that you have to think like this. I know countless family friends who were a little older that just had done pretty well. They're like, what are we doing? And they all either went to the state line and moved to Nevada, past Lake Tahoe, or they just left the state because it didn't pencil. Now, you couldn't pay me, and I live in the East Bay, which is east of San Francisco. And I grew up kind of in, obviously, the Sacramento area, which is on this side of the bridge. You couldn't pay me any amount of money to live down where the 49ers are. I don't like that area at all. So I understand where he's coming from. It's a weird place down there. The taxes, it's a little different. The people, Silicon Valley, it ain't the most normal operation. And then from a football standpoint, I understand the usage. Like, maybe he doesn't want to be a running back. Maybe he just wants to play wide receiver. Now, his value goes down as a true wide receiver because A.J. Brown's a better player, just as a true wide receiver. DK Metcalf, the chances that Deebo Samuel, I think Deebo Samuel has 10 career passing, catching touchdowns. DK has 29. Now, Deebo had a ton, I think he had 8 this year, the last 10 games. Deebo's a dominant player. But it's a complicated case. Now, ultimately, the positives is he plays for the 49ers, one of the biggest brands in the league, an absolute cash cow, which made him, you play for the 49ers and you're a dominant player, Google the history of the league. You become a superstar. You play for a dominant offensive coach who uses you and creates your greatness. But ultimately, this is a business. We've seen Tyreek Hill, who had accomplished much more for Kansas City Chiefs. Super Bowl, been to another, countless All-Pros and Pro Bowls. He couldn't have been any happier when he went to Miami. Why? Because it's a business. I'm not saying these guys are truly mercenaries, but there's a mercenary element to the business in which they're in. You don't get to do it forever. So, you have to maximize your amount of money. And I think that us on the outside, and anyone listening that's a big fan of the Steelers, the Cowboys, the Eagles, the Niners, whoever, you're much more invested most of the time into the team than most of the players are. I'm not talking about on a given week in a game. I'm just talking about what the team means to you. Right? To me, the team means a lot to GMs and coaches because they're all in. They want to keep that job forever. But most players know that at any moment's notice they can go. They're not on scholarship. They can be cut. They get injured. They get thrown to the side really quick, thrown in the trash. Right? That happens. So I understand both sides of this situation. Now, ultimately, the NFL is not Adam Silver's league. In the NBA, when you want to trade, you demand a trade, you always get traded. It just happens, especially now. David Stern's NBA, that didn't happen. In Adam Silver's league, the players run it. And as we've seen, we can debate, it's not the healthiest thing to do. Because ultimately, your league's strength is dependent on the fans. And the happier the fans are, the more they watch and the more money you make. That's why the NFL has never had happier fans. They gamble on the games. They play fantasy. All their teams every year, whether it works out that way, always has a chance when the season starts. And if I want to keep a player, historically, I've always been able to keep that player. Now, you make decisions, right? Ultimately, the Packers wanted to keep Devontae, but Devontae didn't want to play there anymore. So they made a decision. You're gone. First and second round pick. The Chiefs liked Tyreek Hill, but they got an offer they couldn't refuse. And they ultimately didn't want to pay the money. But in this situation, the 49ers can just say, no, Deebo, you're not going anywhere. And in the history of the NFL, that happens way more often than the guy forces his way out. Now, is he prepared to sit out the season? Who knows? Only truly Deebo knows that. And honestly, it would be impossible for him to even know that now. He's a second-round pick. He's scheduled to make $4 million. That's a lot of money for a guy that hasn't made that much money. So I would say he would not sit out the season. He would play. And I would be shocked if he sat out training camp because he would get fined. So more than likely, if the Niners want to play hardball, they won't only couldn't play it, they'll win. It's a management coach league. Obviously, you need great players, But the management and coaches typically have the leverage. And in this situation, the Niners have the leverage. Now, when it comes to a decision, ultimately it's a business on their end too. You'd be crazy. And I talked to a couple people in the league yesterday. I just started texting around. I said, what do you think? What's he worth? And they're like, actually, I just watched him. Basically, like every team in the league over the last 24 hours, 48 hours, if you're listening to this on Friday, has put in several eyeballs on Deebo Samuel, done deep dives. He's that great of a player. And when great players request a trade, everyone sniffs around. But what's he worth? And to me, when you have the leverage, a.k.a. the Niners, I don't have to trade him. I can just keep him. To me, he's worth 175 cents on the dollar. So I am throwing out, I need multiple ones and multiple twos because we don't want to trade him, and we don't need to. So to me, to trade him, you have to get an astronomical return. But luckily, he made this trade request before the draft. If he's going to get traded, and I would imagine the 49ers are not only receiving calls, but having meetings. What's he worth? If I'm John Lynch and I'm Kyle Shanahan, well, hey, Kyle, because we didn't have a first-round pick, we probably haven't watched Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, all the star players in this draft. Let's take a look at them all. Because what if the Jets are willing to give us 10, 38, and next year's 1? Who knows? That sounds crazy. I wouldn't do that if I was the Jets, but other teams are desperate. I wouldn't have done that trade if I was the Dolphins, but they're desperate. So they traded a lot for Tyreek Hill, right? I didn't think the Packers got enough for Devontae. But if I'm the Niners, yeah, I mean, we're taking calls. We're seeing what we get, kind of like ultimately the Seattle did with Russ. And you get enough calls, you get enough offers. Maybe if you, it's always easy to say, I don't want to sell my house. I don't want to move. My house is worth $1 million. I wouldn't sell it for anything under $3 million. And then someone knocks on your door and goes, I'll give you $3.5 million. Well, then you have to decide, like, are you actually do you want to move all your shit? Is all that money worth it? Like, ultimately, the 49ers, Deebo Samuel is Kyle Shanahan's, his, like, favorite toy he's had since Julio Jones. It made Kyle look like a fucking genius. So, no way he wants to get rid of this guy. Now, there's a factor how much you have to pay him and everything, but someone knocks on that door and makes an offer like the Jets, who are extremely desperate, that you can't turn down. What if the Texans go, hey, we'll give you pick 13 and 2 more second-round picks? And you just go, well, I wouldn't do the trade before the draft night, but if on draft night an offer like that's on the table and Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, who knows, whatever player that you think is going to be a star is there, maybe it's worth it. It's at least worth having a discussion. So this is a complicated situation. I understand where Deebo's coming from. Under no circumstances, if I was him, would I want to pay the taxes that you have to pay here, given the amount of money he's going to get. Now you can say, John, well, other players do it. Yeah, well, if I'm not other players, Steph pays, as someone told me that knows, an astronomical amount in taxes. So does LeBron, so do all these guys. And I would struggle with that if I had the opportunity to play elsewhere. Because, again, this is a business. Now, I get Steph makes so much goo-goo bucks, it doesn't even matter. But for a guy like Deebo, whose shelf life could be short, this could be the last big contract he ever signs. If he hates living here, if he wants more money, if he wants to, whatever the reason is, no one really knows except him and maybe the 49ers. And I understand that the 49ers side don't want to pay him huge money, even though he's a great player, because you don't really like playing running backs. I've stood next to Deebo. He's not built like DK Metcalf or A.J. Brown or Justin Jefferson. He looks like a running back physically, and that's what makes him a great player. And he is an elite player with the ball in his hands. Those type of people you can't just find in the draft, and that's the risk of making a trade for draft picks. There is, and the Chiefs did it, the Packers did it. There is no guarantee that they can land good players. The draft is just that, a complete crapshoot. I saw it with the Niners. They traded DeForest Buckner, and they ended up taking Javon Kinlaw with that pick. And he's been basically MIA for 2 years. Now he's training like every player coming back off injuries and posts on Instagram, but, it's not easy. It's not guaranteed. So it's going to be a fascinating situation to watch play out over the next week. Thanks for watching 3 and Out. You can check out the podcast below in the description, and make sure you subscribe right now to the Volumes YouTube channel.